like one fact or item in the book. And I actually brought Paddington with me today. He came to read our story with us. So Paddington by Michael Bond. Mr. and Mrs. Brown first met Paddington on a railway platform. In fact, that was how he came to have such an unusual name for a bear, because Paddington was the name of the station. The Browns were waiting to meet their daughter, Judy, when Mr. Brown noticed something small and furry near the left luggage office. "It looks like a bear," he said. "A bear?" repeated Mrs. Brown. "In Paddington Station? Don't be silly, Henry. There can't be." But Mr. Brown was right. It was sitting on an old leather suitcase marked "Wanted on Voyage," and as they drew near, it stood up and politely raised its hat. "Good afternoon," it said. "May I help you?" "It's very kind of you," said Mr. Brown, "but as a matter of fact, we were wondering if we could help you." "You're a very small bear," said Mrs. Brown. "Where are you from?" The bear looked around carefully before replying. "Darkest Peru. I'm not really supposed to be here at all. I'm a stowaway." "You don't mean to say you've come all the way from South America on your own," explained Mrs. Brown. "Whatever did you do for food?" Unlocking the suitcase, the bear took out an almost empty glass jar. "I ate marmalade," it said. "Bears like marmalade. And marmalade is something similar to like jelly that we have here." Mrs. Brown looked at a label around the bear's neck. It said simply, "Please look after this bear. Thank you." "Oh, Henry," she cried, "we can't leave him here all by himself. There's no knowing what might happen to him. Can't he come home and stay with us?" "Stay with us?" repeated Mr. Brown nervously. He looked down at the bear. Would you like that?" he asked. "That is," he added hastily, "if you have nothing else planned." "Ooh, yes," replied the bear. "I would like that very much. I've nowhere to go, and everyone seems in such a hurry." "That settles it, Mrs. Brown. Now you must be thirsty after your journey. Mr. Brown can get you some tea while I go and meet our daughter." "But Mary," said Mr. Brown, "we don't even know his name." Mrs. Brown thought for a moment. "I know," she said. "We'll call him Paddington, after the station." "Paddington," the bear tested it several times to make sure. "It sounds very important." Mr. Brown tried it out next. "Follow me, Paddington," he said. "I'll take you to the snack bar." Mr. Brown was as good as his word. Paddington had never seen so many snacks on one tray, and he didn't know which to try first. He was so hungry and thirsty that he climbed up onto the table to get a better look. Mr. Brown turned away, pretending he had tea with the bear at Paddington Station every day of his life. "Henry," cried Mrs. Brown when she arrived with Judy, "what are you doing to that poor bear?" Paddington jumped up to raise his hat, and in his haste, he slipped a strawberry tart, skidded on cream, and fell over backwards into his cup of tea. "I think we better go before anything else happens," said Mr. Brown. Judy took hold of Paddington's paw. "Come along," she said. "We'll take you home, and you can meet Mrs. Bird and my brother, Jonathan." Mr. Brown led the way to a waiting taxi. "Number 32 Windsor Gardens, please," he said. The driver stared at Paddington. "Bears is extra," he growled. "Sticky bears is twice as much, and make sure none of it comes off on my interior. It was clean when I set out this morning." The sun was shining, and they drove out of the station, and there were cars and big red buses everywhere. Paddington waved to some people waiting at a bus stop, and several of them waved back. It was all very friendly. Paddington tapped the taxi driver on his shoulder. "It isn't a bit like Darkest Peru," he announced. The man jumped out at the sound of Paddington's voice. "Cream," he said bitterly. "Cream and jam all over my coat." He slid the little window behind him shut. "Dear Henry," murmured Mrs. Brown, "I I wonder if we're doing the right thing. Fortunately, before anyone had time to answer, they arrived at Windsor Gardens, and Judy helped Paddington onto the pavement. Now you're going to meet Mrs. Bird. She looks after us. She's a bit fierce at times, but she doesn't really mean it. I'm sure you'll like her. Paddington fell to his knees, began to wobble. I'm sure I shall, if you say so. The thing is, will she like me? Goodness gracious, exclaimed Mrs. Bird. What have you got there? It's not a what, said Judy. It's a bear called Paddington, and he's coming to stay with us. A bear, said Mrs. Bird, as Paddington raised his hat. Well, he has good manners, I'll say that for him. I'm afraid I stepped on a jam tart by mistake, said Paddington. I can see that, said Mrs. Bird. You better have a bath before you're very much older. Judy can turn it on for you. I dare say you'll be wanting some marmalade, too. I think she likes you, whispered Judy. Paddington had never been in a bathroom before. While water was running, he made himself at home. First of all, he tried writing his name on the steam in the mirror, and he used Mr. Brown's shaving cream to draw a map of Peru on the floor. It wasn't until a drip landed on his head that he remembered what he was supposed to be doing. He soon discovered that getting into a bath is one thing, but quite another matter getting out again, especially when it's full of soapy water. Paddington tried calling out, "Help!" At first in a quiet voice, as not to disturb anyone. Then very loudly, "Help! Help!" When that didn't work, he began bailing the water out with his hat, but the hat had several holes in it, and his map of Peru soon turned into a sea of foam. Suddenly, Jonathan and Judy burst into the bathroom and lifted a dripping Paddington onto the floor. "Thank goodness you're all right," cried Judy. "We heard you calling out." "Fancy making such a mess," said Jonathan admirably. "You should have pulled the plug out." "Oh," said Paddington, "I never thought of that." When Paddington came downstairs, he looked so clean that no one could possibly be cross with him. His fur was all soft and silky, his nose gleamed, and his paws had lost all traces of the jam and cream. The Browns made room for him in a small armchair, and Mrs. Bird brought him a pot of tea and a plate of buttered toast and marmalade. "Now," said Mrs. Brown, "you tell us all about yourself. I'm sure you must have had lots of adventures." "I have," said Paddington earnestly. "Things are always happening to me. I'm that sort of a bear." He settled back into the armchair. "I was brought up by my Aunt Lucy in darkest Peru," he began, "but he had to go into the home for retired bears in Lima." He closed his eyes thoughtfully, and a hush fell over the room as everyone waited expectantly. After a while, when nothing happened, they began to get restless. Mr. Brown tried coughing, then he reached across and poked Paddington. "Well, I never," he said. "I do believe he's fast asleep." "And after all that's happened to him," said Mrs. Brown, "is it any wonder?" So Paddington had a lot of adventures, didn't he? Yeah. I'm gonna have this table come sit down at the smart board, and then I'll have Ashton's table, and then Bristol's table, and then Dayton's table, and then the last table. We'll pass them around at the end, okay? And then I'll have Asher, will you turn off the lights for me? So these are pictures from London where Paddington was found at the train station. This bottom picture is of a train station and that you might find in England. And then this picture is of London at nighttime. And this is a tower called Big Ben. Paddington might have seen that as well. And then, you do? And then these houses over here, this is what the Browns might have lived in when Paddington went to visit them. This is characterized as the setting where the story takes place. we could say that the story takes place in a train station, or in England, or in the Brown house. And then these are events that happened to Paddington during the story. He ate snacks with Mr. Brown, didn't he? And he got them all over himself. So then they took a taxi ride. This is a taxi that you might find in London, to the Brown house. And then he had to take a bath because he was so dirty. And he made a huge mess in the bathroom, didn't he? That's right. Okay, let's see. So I have 3 events that we just talked about. And I'm gonna have one person raise their hand and tell me if it happened at the beginning of the story, in the middle of the story, or the end of the story. So I have Paddington takes a bath and makes a huge mess. Bristol?
Middle.
The middle, that's right. Paddington rides in a taxi cab with the Browns. You think that did happen first? It definitely happened before he took a bath, huh? Paddington eats snacks. At the beginning, that's right. Good job. So I'm going to have you guys return to your seats and we're going to do one more activity. Go back to your seat, please. So this is what we're going to be completing today. This is like a 4-square story map, and we have the setting, the characters, events, and then you'll draw a picture of your favorite event or setting. Do you have a question? No? So I'm going to pass out the papers, and then I'll show you guys how to fold them. There's 4 for this table. Y'all pass me over. Okay. So I already folded mine, so the crease marks are there, but you're going to take it and line up the corners like this, and you're going to make what I like to call a hamburger fold. And you're going to fold it just like this. The other way, Liam. That's what I call a hot dog fold. Fold just like this. That's a hamburger fold. Yes. Just yes, ma'am. You've got it. And then after you have it folded like this, you're going to fold it one more time, hamburger fold as well. Have it, Ashley? It's okay. You fold it just like this, and you'll have 4 squares. me about the setting. What we talked about on the PowerPoint. Number 15. Can somebody tell me what the setting looks like? Okay, it was about Paddington, but can you tell me where they found Paddington? At the station. So if in your first box at the top, everybody write train. They found him near the train. T-R-A-I-N. Train. And then where else did the setting take place? Did it take place at the Brown's house?
Yes, I know.
Who can raise their hand and spell house for me? Dayton? Okay, very close. We learned about OU this week, so it's H-O-U-S-E. Very close. So everybody needs to write house on your train. In the same box that you wrote train, you write house. It's H-O-U-S-E. And now we're going to talk about the characters in the book. So, number 10. Who's number 10? Luke. Luke, can you tell me about one of the characters in the book? Who was the book about? Was it about Paddington the bear? Who can raise their hand and spell bear for me? Very close. It's B-E-A-R. That's okay. Where are you having this phone? You're okay. Bear is going to go in this box over here. I'll write it on the board for you. How about that? Who can raise their hand and tell me another character that was in the book? Okay. In this box right here at the top. You need some help? So the bathtub is not a character, but that might be considered to be a setting. Who can raise their hand and tell me a character? Dayton? The Browns. Good job. So, and then I'll take one more for one more character. Bristol? Judy. right back in this box. It'll be in this box right here. Okay, who can raise their hand and tell me another event that we talked about? Asher? We talked about the Brown's house. We did talk about the Brown's house, but what event did we talk about? We talked that they were beginning, middle, and end. The train station? What did Paddington do at the train station? He did meet the Browns, and then Mr. Brown took him to get what? Took him to get a snack. So we'll write snack in the same box. Good job. Okay, I'll write it on the board for you, okay?
Teachers, I left out one of the most important parts of the announcement this morning, and I'm going to send an email out, but I want you to know that our entire school system improved this year, and we are now an A school system. We've never, I don't know that we have in recent years been an A district, but this
Okay,
year,
I'm gonna
Washington
write
School,
house and
the
train
whole
for
thing,
those
we're
who
an
need
A
help
district. Not every
spelling that
school is
one.
an A, but our district overall is an A, and I'm so proud of that. So I'm going to send you the email, you can look at it.
Okay, and then we talked about one more event. What did they ride in on the way to the Brown's house? You need some help? A taxi. Now this might be a new word for you. It might be a little difficult, but it has an X in it. It's gonna be in the same box where you wrote snack. Good job. It is. Okay, and then in this last box, the last box you have left, you're gonna draw me a picture of your favorite setting or your favorite event. So you could draw Paddington eating the snacks, Paddington taking the bath, Paddington in the train station. What's that? Sure. Sure. If you'd like to draw your favorite character, you can do that as well. Draw it in this box right down here. And then if you want to use your colors, you can. All right, I'll give you about 5 minutes to work on your drawing. Ashton?